Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of our 4-week series on the rules of golf and trying something new this year. We're excited to bring you this virtual series covering many different topics than we'd be able to offer in person and to reach more of our members as well, which is the two main goals of this virtual series and trying this new process is to reach out to more members and make it more convenient for those members and also educate as many people as we can. So thank you for joining us and being a part of this, the first week, and we hope that you'll join us in the future. And we welcome any feedback that you can provide, and we hope that you'll enjoy this and pass our link on to your friends, colleagues. If you have any junior golfers that are out there that can attend our evening series, please let them know. Because again, we just want to educate as many people as possible and learn ourselves and make this better for the future. Just a few things before we do get started. My name is Josh Coates. I am the Director of Championships and Golf Operations, and I will be joined by Amanda Braun, Assistant Director of Championships and Golf Operations, who will be presenting this week's topics, and I will be helping her with questions. And on the note of questions, please keep those to only the topics that are being covered this week. We hope that you've seen our schedule and had a chance to log into the USGA's Rules 101 class and got up to speed on not only this week's topics, but we'll do so in the future as we'll break this up, and we encourage everybody to go through those topics on the USGA's Rules 101 as these sessions will be mainly review. There'll be some teaching and lots of time to answer questions, but we hope that you'll self-educate, and that way, when you do come across questions, write those down and be prepared to ask those for each week. If we don't get to your question today, please reach out directly to us. We'll be keeping track of those that have been entered, and we'll do our best to respond either live on the broadcast or reaching out directly. We are going to keep the questions to a very high level. This is kind of a Rules 101 session, so we don't want to get too deep into the weeds on any topic, and we want to answer questions that we think will be beneficial to the entire group. And sometimes the more complicated questions, although very good, they can lead to some confusion. So with that being said, if you do have a question, there is a place to enter that manually on the chat feature and the questions, and there'll be several breaks throughout the sessions for us to recap those questions and answer those live. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Amanda, who will get things started, and I will be back with you shortly with some answers to your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Josh. We'll go ahead and get started this week. Again, as Josh has mentioned, we did lay out a schedule for the different topics we'll cover each week using the USGA Rules 101. Our first section today is going to be introduction to the game is what we'll start off with. If you do have a rules golf book, this would be under the Rule 1. And we'll dive right in with what is golf. It's kind of essential to know the game we love, the game we play, the game we're trying to learn the rules for. So golf is as simple as playing a round of 18 holes or fewer on a course by striking a ball with a club. Pretty self-explanatory. I think we all know this, but that is the defined golf term in the rules of golf. And in order to understand the rules, we need to understand why the rules exist. And the two great principles of the rules are playing the course as you find it and playing the ball as it lies. If you look forward to our schedule, you'll see that these two topics are going to be covered next week, but keep those in the back of your mind when thinking about the rules of golf, as those are kind of the two main principles of why the rules exist and kind of thinking about the rule that applies. Golf is a complicated game. We see on the screen here different pictures of different golf holes, and this is really why the rules are complicated, and they have to cover a lot of things. You see from the very first picture with the desert, not necessarily in Virginia, but if you go out to Arizona, you might encounter a hole like that. To the second picture, which is a lot of tree-covered holes, we got to figure out what to do if your ball's in the trees, if you get relief from those. To the third, which is famously number 17 at Sawgrass, the water hole, right? We need rules in order to help you with what happens if you dump your ball in the water. And again, in future weeks we'll cover that. So this is just kind of an overview of why we have the rules, why they're a little bit more complicated than other sports, but it's because the rules have to cover so many different things, not only in the United States, but across the world. And then the spirit of the game. This is kind of one of the things that makes golf unique, makes golf what it is. Players are expected to play in the spirit of the game, and this means to act with integrity. You're required or supposed to call rules on yourself. If you break a penalty, if you have a penalty, you have to call that on yourself. You can't necessarily just sweep it under the rug if no one saw it. Applying your own penalties and being honest is really the root of the game of golf. Showing consideration to others, that's playing at a prompt pace, trying not to hold other groups up, whether you're playing with them, if they're playing behind you, looking out for safety of others, not distracting another player. These are all things we try to do in the game of golf. And then taking good care of the course, replacing divots, smoothing bunkers, repairing ball marks, doing things for people that may be playing the course behind you to try to make sure that they have the best conditions as well. And of course, not causing unnecessary damage to the course. That's our first quick section there. Do we have any questions before we move on?
No questions so far.
We'll kind of dive into our next section here, which is probably one of the main things that a lot of you are curious in, which are what are the major rules changes that happened? And again, we did have a rule change happen this year, January 1st of 2023. Not quite as big as 2019, but we will see some of the major changes that did happen and be happy to answer any questions you might have on any of these. Our first is there is an infographic that is included in today's presentation. It is in the handouts feature on that you should see on your kind of control panel. So you can go ahead and download that. We'll also make sure this is on our website and posted as well. It is on the USGA website as well, but it's kind of the graphic that the USGA released for the 2023 rules of golf, the 5 main changes. And we'll see each of these as we go through this part of the presentation. The first one is the equipment change. So this is one where if you've been with the rules of golf or seen the rules of golf in 2019, and when that major change happened, it was something that was implemented as a model local rule. And essentially the USGA put out that what they thought was the right thing and then kind of went back on it a little bit, but they've kind of incorporated that model local rule into the rule itself. And this is if you damage any part of your club, you are now allowed to change it. And when we're talking about damage with clubs, it could be any part, feature, or property of the club that's changed. Whether you see here, you bang it against a tree and it breaks, it could be as simple as taking cart path relief, or not cart path relief, but playing from a cart path and scuffing up your club head. That would be a change in the definition of this rule, and you would be entitled to change your club out, replace it, make that one not in play, put a brand new club in play. The only exception we have with this rule is in the case of abuse. So we see down at the bottom, this player's about to break his club over his neck. Would not recommend doing that, as I feel like it would hurt. But in that case, you would not be entitled to replace a club if you abused it in a way that you broke it. There is a call out to, there is model local rule G9 that could still be in effect for different competitions. I would imagine you would see this at higher competitions such as VSGA championships, USGA championships and qualifiers, and other major events that you might run at your course. But that is essentially taking away that any damage is allowing you to replace your club. So if this model local rule is in effect, it limits you to only being able to replace your club if it is broken or significantly damaged. So we see here again that first picture of a player hitting a tree and the club breaking in half. That would constitute broken or significant damage. It would take away that scuffing from a cart path to not being allowed you to replace your club. So just make sure if you are running a competition or playing in a competition, you check that model local rule sheet to make sure that you know if this is in effect or if not, if you do want to replace a club. The next change that did come into the 2023 rules, I like to refer to this as the Ricky Fowler rule. It happened close to 2019, it might have been in 2020, I believe, at the Waste Management. So we'll talk about what happened in this situation and how it has changed. So you see here on the screen, Ricky Fowler, his original ball was played into the penalty area. He took his relief, dropped the ball with a 1 penalty stroke, and he made the mistake of walking up to the green to check out whatever he needed to do, figure out where he was going to play. And while he was up looking at the green, the ball rolled back into the penalty area. At that time, when this rule was not in effect, hadn't been changed yet, he had to take another penalty stroke under the penalty area rule in order to get his ball back in play. And now in today's day and age, that has been changed. So now if we take relief from something, we drop a ball and that ball moves because of natural forces, wind, rain, gravity. If it moves into a different area of the course or out of bounds, you'd be able to replace that ball back in its original spot where it came to rest for no penalty stroke. So Ricky Fowler, in this case, if he were to do it today, he would drop his ball, walk up, you can do that. If it rolls back into the penalty area, if it rolls back into a bunker, if it rolls back into out of bounds, he would just replace a ball, the original ball if he has it, if not any ball, onto that spot. No penalty and play on. Our next major change that we will see a little bit more in depth when we get to the procedural rules is the back on the line relief. So this is one that kind of changed back to a little bit to how it was before the 2019 changes. So now when we're talking about relief rules, normally you will have a reference point in a relief area. This is the exception to that. So when we're using back on the line relief, whether it's for penalty areas, which is the picture in this slide, it could be for unplayable ball, it could be for taking abnormal course condition outside of a bunker. Any of those back on the line relief is going to be a little bit different in the way that you operate. So now under the 2023 rules, you're going to find a spot on the back of the line and drop on the line itself. So we don't create a relief area right off the bat. You have to drop the ball on the line. If you were to miss the line or be off the line, you would then have to redrop in order to avoid penalty. Once that ball is dropped on the line, it can roll up to a club length in any direction. So you see in this graphic, player drops the ball and it might roll a little bit forward. It could roll a little bit backwards, left, right. As long as that ball is dropped on the line and then stays within 1 club length of that spot where it first hits the line, you're good. You can play that ball. You have finished taking relief. And you see a little note here that it's subject to any area of the course requirement. In some of the penalty area rules and playable rule, there is an exception to it has to stay in the area of the course where it first hits. And that's what this is calling out to. So again, see this graphic here. Once that ball hits the ground on the line, then we get our relief area. And that's really what this rule is kind of changed to. So it's gone away from creating the relief area first, where you can pick maybe your 1 club length left to right to avoid some things. Now it's kind of going back to how this rule was structured, the way it was intended for it to work, which is find the spot where it last crossed, in this case, a red penalty area, line it up with the flag stick and go as far back on that line as you like. But you have to drop on the line, and then from there it can roll up to 1 club length in any direction again, including if it rolls forward. It's still fine as long as it's within that 1 club length circle. The next rules change that's kind of been a little bit better for players is the reduction of penalty for an incorrectly substituted ball. Now, substitution is putting a ball into play that you're not supposed to. The best example and the best example we see on this page is if you are on the putting green, we know you're supposed to replace the original ball anytime you pick your ball up to clean it, mark it, or replace it. Any of the time the rules require you to replace a ball back in its original spot, you are supposed to use the original ball in order to not get a penalty. With the rules reduction now, if you do substitute a ball, let's say the example the USGA has is you have a lucky putting ball, you go and substitute that ball on the putting green, that's not your original ball, not the ball you hit there, you would only get a 1-stroke penalty now. Before it was general penalty, and you finish out the hole with that ball and you're fine. You don't have to correct it under this rule. So that's just a little bit of a reduction that has happened. If you do accidentally substitute a ball at any point when you're not allowed to, you're fine. You're not gonna get disqualified. Just add 1 penalty stroke and make sure you finish out the hole with that substituted ball. You can't correct it. Handicap on scorecard, this is a rule that was changed for the better. Essentially, before, whether you knew it or not, if you're playing in a handicap event, the player was responsible of having the correct handicap shown on their scorecard. The USGA has kind of reversed it and put it on the committee, essentially. So now you as a player, if your handicap is wrong, whether it's the playing handicap or the handicap index, you would not be responsible or get any penalties for this. So this is kind of calling out that this responsibility has now gone to the committee. They are the ones that are responsible for getting it right. And if they do get it wrong, to changing it and making sure it is right. And that is no longer on the player. The other major changes the USGA and RNA did was add another rule to the rule book. You will now see there is Rule 25 that was added. And this is a rule that modifies the rules of golf for players with disabilities. Before, you had to go to the model local rules section in order to find any of these adjustments, but the USGA and RNA decided this is too important to be in the model local rule section and decided to put it in its own rule in the rules book. So now if you ever do run an adaptive event or have an event for people with disabilities, there's a whole rule for you to go to that will go through what changes need to be made in order to run the event under the rules of golf. And I think this is a great change, especially with the USGA adding the adaptive open last year. And with that, we'll pause and answer any questions that we might have.
Thanks, Amanda. We did get a few questions come in. First, it's the application of the new exception to 9.3. So we're looking at 9.3 exception to the ball moved by natural forces, which is a change for 2023. So the question was about applying this, and specifically about if you are unsure if it's your ball and you mark and lift it for identification and then place it back or replace it because it is going back on that same exact spot, and then the ball moves for natural forces, do you put it back or play as it lies? Well, this will be applying the exception because you have essentially taken the ball out of play by marking it and lifting it, and because you're putting it back into play by replacing it, this exception would apply and you would replace it back on that spot. The next was a question about a general penalty. And if you look in Rule 1, so there's a few different types of penalties. When we say general penalty, we are talking about a loss of hole in match play and a 2-stroke penalty in stroke play. So whenever we say general penalty, that's what that means. And then our third question was about replacing a broken club and how long do you have to replace it? Well, if you look at Rule 5.6 for prompt pace of play and undue delay, that rule would apply there. There's no specific guideline on seconds or exact time, but basically you have to keep moving, and if you do take an unreasonable amount of time to replace that club, then you might fall subject to penalty under 5.6. That's it for now, Amanda.
Perfect. We'll move into our next section and kind of dive a little bit deeper here. And we will visit the forms of play, which again, you can find in Rule 3. So we're talking about forms of play. Josh kind of just alluded to this, great segue there. But there are different types of penalties depending on the forms of play. So there are only three penalties that you can get in the rules of golf. 1-stroke penalty, which typically is minor infractions where potential advantage is minimal. You see in that first image, a player kicks their ball by accident in the general area, that would just be a 1-stroke penalty, but he has to replace it. You see it with taking relief procedures, 1-stroke penalties are usually added, and that's what those second images are. More commonly in the rules, you will see general penalties, and that is different depending on stroke play and match play. So in match play, general penalty would mean loss of hole. If someone did something to get this penalty, that hole is over, your opponent won the hole and you just move on. In stroke play, it's a 2-stroke penalty. It's not necessarily between those two players. We need to protect the field, and that's when we get 2 strokes added to our score. And it's typically when there is a bigger significant advantage, but not enough that the player's score shouldn't count. So we see the first image there, a player replacing a divot in front of their ball. That is, as we'll learn next week, something you cannot do. You would get the general penalty in this case, and that player in stroke play would get 2 strokes added to their score, or in match play would lose the hole. And we'll see that image again, but an incorrectly way to hit the ball. Again, 2 strokes in stroke play, loss of hole in match play. And the last penalty you can see in the rules of golf is the disqualification penalty. It's something tournament officials never want to do, but it does happen if there is a breach so significant that the player's score should not be allowed to count. Typically, it's if you play from a wrong place, and from that place you've played, you've gained a significant advantage where we just cannot count that score. That would be when we see the disqualification penalty kick in. We have a good chart here that kind of goes through stroke play versus match play. We will start with match play since it is listed first in the Rules of Golf book, and we'll kind of look at the differences here. So in match play, we're playing against only one opponent. So it's against you versus someone else. We don't care what the rest of the field is doing in match play. It is 18 one-hole contests, so you are only playing against that person for one hole. Whoever wins the hole goes up or down. We'll see in the scoring section. And then general penalty, we just covered, is different. And you have a right to know the match score. You want to know what the match score is since you're playing against this person. It might change what decisions you make. Maybe you'll be more aggressive depending on how you're playing or how your opponent's playing. Maybe you want to be more conservative. So you do have the right to know where you stand. Concessions are permitted, so that's something that we don't see in stroke play. You are allowed to give a putt, a stroke, a hole, or even the match to your opponent at any point in time. And in match play, you're allowed to overlook your opponent's breaches. You don't necessarily have to call a penalty. Again, if you saw them do something and maybe they hit a terrible shot, you can let that go and you don't have to make them replay it, or if on the opposite side, if they do break a rule and they do hit a great shot, you can recall that stroke or you can call that penalty, and they could either get a 1-stroke penalty or get the general penalty and lose the hole. An example I like to use for that one is if your opponent is in a bunker and they swipe some sand away and making a stroke. We know under the bunker rules that is not allowed. You're not allowed to move sand in any way when making a stroke to improve your lie. And in that case, it could depend on how that shot turns out, whether you want to call that breach or not. And lastly, resolving doubts or requesting a ruling. There is a timely manner where you need to do so. Again, we need to know where the match stands. So you do have to decide that either between yourselves or request a ruling and then get that figured out before you start the next hole. So there is a time gap there where you do have to request a ruling. Once you tee off on the next hole, you do not get to request it any longer as long as you knew that it occurred. Switching to stroke play, again, playing against the entire field. So these rules we'll see protects the whole field. It's you against everyone else. It's not one-on-one like match play. You're playing one 18-hole contest, and the scoring is total strokes made. Unlike match play, you have a score at the end. You have a number. It's not necessarily 1 up, 1 down, 2 up, anything like that. You have to total the number of strokes you've made with any penalty strokes, and that is the score you get. General penalty, again, 2 penalty strokes. We need to count the strokes, so that's why that one makes a little bit more sense. There's no loss of hole because you have to finish every hole. guarantee of standing. So in stroke play, you don't need to know where you stand. It might be nice to know where you stand, and we've seen a lot of events kind of go to live scoring in order to give you that opportunity, but it's not something you're guaranteed to know in stroke play. Again, you must hole out in every hole. That is one of the fundamental rules of stroke play. You need to have a score for every hole, otherwise you would be disqualified. And the rules protect the field. So again, if there are any breaches, this is when you have to call them on yourselves. If you have any rules officials around, they would call that rule on you. Your playing partners could also call rules on you, that sort of thing. We need to protect the field in stroke play. And resolving doubts, we have a little bit more time in stroke play. Again, it's just before we return the scorecard that we need to resolve any doubts. Typically in scoring, you'll be asked, did you have any rulings out there? Let's get those figured out before we completely figure out or assign the scorecard and turn it in. So those are just the major differences between match play and stroke play. We have different ways that players can compete. We have 3 on the screen here. Individual play, probably the majority of the golf we play in competitions is individual. It's one person against everyone else. Or again, in match play, it could be a singles, you versus one other person, or in stroke play, you versus the whole field. Partners, there are different forms of partner play, and a side can consist of 2 or more partners competing against another side. The most commonly partner play formats are foursomes or alternate shot, and then 4-ball. So alternate shot, 1 ball being used between 2 players, 4-ball, each partner is playing their own ball into the hole and you're taking the best score. And then lastly, we have team competitions. This is more seen in colleges, high schools, maybe our team matches. We have our Carolinas, Virginias, men's, women's, and junior matches. That's what we're talking about with team competitions. So it's a group of players that are playing either as individuals or as partners or sides, and they're competing against the other team. Some resources. So there are only 2 rules of golf books that are currently offered. The USGA has gone away from the Players Edition, which was the little pocket-sized book that if you've ever attended one of our in-person rules workshops, you probably received one. The USGA has decided that probably the majority of people who have those don't actually use them. So they've gone away from publishing those to save and help with sustainability. So we have the Rules of Golf book, which is thinner. It covers, as it says, just the rules. And then there's the official guide. And the official guide includes the rules of golf, as well as any clarifications, as well as committee procedures and model local rules in the back. The USGA does have all of the rules of golf posted on their website at usga.org. And you can see the rules, you can see the clarifications, you can see the committee procedures all online. And lastly, we have the USGA Rules of Golf app. And this is where I would encourage every single person who plays golf to download the app. The USGA Rules of Golf app is very user-friendly. They have a nice search feature in there that you can search something if you're on the course and can't figure out what to do. If your ball's out of bounds, for instance, and you're like, shoot, I just cannot remember what to do. You can search out of bounds and it'll come up with a bunch of different things, and you can click the one that pertains to you and it'll drop the rule right there. If you are someone who does run events, in the settings of the Rules of Golf app, you can turn it to expert mode and it will give you those clarifications and dive a little bit deeper if that's what you need. But I would definitely encourage everyone to download the app if you haven't done so. We're at a day and age now where we all carry our phones with us at all times, whether they're on or off on the course. It's always there if we do need it in a pinch. We'll kind of switch into how to use the golf book. And when being a rules official, you need to know kind of a bunch of different things. And if there was a rules question at hand, this is kind of the steps that I would take in order to figure out what the answer would be. And the first is we need to know what form of play is occurring. Is it match play? Is it stroke play? Because as we saw, there could be different penalties applied. There could be different things that happen between the forms of play. So that would be number 1. What form of play are we doing? And then we have the questions, the who, what, where, when, and why. Who's involved? That's important to know. Was it the player that did something to their own ball? Was it an opponent who did it to a player's ball? Was it a caddy that did it for someone's ball? We need to know who was involved and what happened. What was the instance that we need to figure out? Did the ball move? Did it go into a penalty area? Was it deflected while in motion? What happened? Where did it happen? Where on the golf course did this occurrence happen? We'll see next week when we kind of go through the areas of the course. It depends on where your ball was in order to understand what rule applies. If it was at a bunker, you could have a penalty of different penalties for bunkers or putting greens. It could be in the general area, and maybe the rule is different. So we need to know where on the course it happened. And when did it happen? Was it while searching for it? Was it within that 3-minute search time? If you're making a ruling, did you do it before you teed off from the next hole or after you teed off from the next hole? Those are the kinds of things we would need to know in order to get the ruling right. And then why? There are so many intent-based rules in the rules of golf, and sometimes it does matter to figure out, why did this person do this? What was their intent in teeing off? We'll see that in our next section. But it could matter why the player did something and whether they would get a penalty or not. Moving into the definitions. The definitions of the rules of golf are the one place I would start every single person. If you come up and ask me, I want to get involved in the rules, what can I do? Read the definitions. The definitions are at the back of the rules of golf book, but they are just as important as the rules of golf themselves. There are so many answers to questions that you can find just by looking at the definition of what you're looking for. So definitely take a look at those and maybe start with the definitions if you do have a rules question. Then you would go into the rule, figure out what rule applies. Again, if you have the app, you can just search for it on the app and it'll pull up what rule you need to go to. It'll take you straight to that rule. For instance, if you have ground under repair and you don't know what to do, you would be turned to Rule 16. And then if you're unclear, if the rule's just not making sense, look for clarifications. If you do have that official guide, it would be at the back of the rule that it would pertain to, but that's something you might want to look at. It kind of gives you helpful examples. Maybe it goes a little bit deeper in explaining how the rule, or why the rule is the way that it is, and that would give you a better answer. Then if all else fails, ask for help. You can call us, the VSGA, you can call the USGA. Professional staff at courses are usually pretty knowledgeable as well. So don't be afraid to ask for help if you go through all these and you still don't know why or the answer. Please reach out and ask for help, and we'd be happy to help answer any questions. And with that, we'll go to our next question slide.
Thanks, Amanda. Great job. We don't currently have any questions that have been posted to the chat, but I'll just quickly remind everyone, kind of piggybacking on what Amanda just said, that you can contact the VSGA office, and someone should be available by phone during normal business hours. During the summertime, we are all traveling and running events, so it might be a little more difficult, but typically somebody will answer and be able to provide an answer or provide you a number with someone that can give you an answer relatively quickly. Also, if you just have a general question that is something that is on your mind that you're curious about, you can go to our website, and under the Learn section and Contact Us, towards the bottom, there's a Rules of Golf specific section that you can submit questions, and those go directly to our emails, to where we can receive those emails at any time and try to respond as promptly as we can, especially if we see that it's something a little more urgent. But we would stress that if it is an urgent call, to first try the VSGA office, and then if no one is available, the USGA number, they have somebody on call during those times as well to get you those quick answers. So I'll turn it back over to Amanda, but if any questions do come up, please submit and we'll be happy to answer.
Great. And we are approaching our last section for today, and we're going to cover playing the ball. So all that is covered in this rule, you can find in rule number 10. So starting off with playing the ball, as it might make sense, we need to know what is the definition of a stroke. We've talked about how we keep score in stroke play, and counting our strokes is how we do that. So what is a stroke? And in the game of golf, A stroke is a forward movement of the club made to strike the ball. So this is one little sentence that has a lot of parts. So forward meaning the backswing is not part of the stroke. That would be not what this rule covers. And made to strike the ball. So you have to have an intent. This is an intent-based rule. If you, you'll see in the next slides, if you accidentally strike the ball when making a practice swing, that would not be a stroke. You would not get one penalty stroke there. We've seen it probably more common in just club play, but there are videos of pros also putting the ball up on a tee and taking a practice swing and hitting the ball on accident. It does happen to everyone. And in that case, if your intent was not to hit the ball, you would not have made a stroke and you would not have to count that in your score. So it could also be when you decide not to hit the ball on your downswing. At any point when you change your mind and you change from I intended to hit the ball to I do not intend to hit the ball, that would be fine as long as it was before the club head reached the ball. And again, if you accidentally strike the ball when making a practice swing or when you were preparing to make a stroke, that would not be a stroke. However, depending on where you are on the golf course, you could still get a penalty. So teeing area and putting green, different situations. If you accidentally strike your ball in those areas of the course, you would not get a penalty. But you can't be in the fairway, accidentally take a practice swing too close to your ball, cause your ball to move. Yes, you have not made a stroke, but you do have a penalty of 1 stroke for moving your ball when you're not allowed to, and you have to put that ball back. And how to make a stroke. We have a lot of some do's and a lot of don'ts. So when we're talking about making a stroke, you are entitled to fairly striking your ball. So making a free-flowing swing at your ball with momentary contact. You must hit your ball with the head of your club. We've seen some savvy people out there who like to try to use the back of their club in order to hit it into the hole as if they were playing pool. That it would not be allowed. That would not be a stroke. And then only you, yourself, and your abilities are allowed when making a stroke. Generally, you can't get outside help. There are some exceptions, and we'll see that in our don'ts. What you can't do is push, scrape, or scoop your ball. So you can't push it into an area if it's up against a tree root. You can't try to scoop the ball out. Again, the contact has to be momentary. It can't be a very long time where that ball is against the club face. You can't anchor. This was something that was huge back in 2019 when we were not allowed to anchor. And we'll see down at the bottom, we have a graphic straight from the Rules of Golf book that shows you the do's and don'ts of anchoring. You can grip it against your forearm, but you can't hold it against your stomach. You can have 2 hands separated on the grip as long as you don't have an anchor point. So that sort of anchoring style has gone away. You can't anchor your club at any point. Otherwise, you would get a penalty. Croquet style stroke. We see our black and white picture there where you can't line it up behind and scoop it forward. That would not be allowed. So that would be against making a stroke. Playing a ball while it is moving is against the rules. We saw Phil Mickelson do this a bunch of years ago when the ball was rolling off the putting green. While it was still rolling off, he angrily hit it again. That would be against the rules under this rule. And generally, we cannot accept outside help. Now, the Rules of Golf do allow us to have a caddy. They do allow us to use different types of equipment, such as a distance measuring device to figure out our yardage. Those sort of things are allowed, but we can't have help from aligning certain things. We can't have help with, you see that second image, a caddy holding an umbrella over the player while they're making their stroke. That's the kind of outside help that would not be allowed. And while we can have a caddy, we can't have more than one at a time. So that would be not allowed under the Rules of Golf. Going into our advice and help a little bit further, this was also a change that was made for 2023, a slight change, I would say. When you're helping with line of play, you cannot set down an object to aim, take your stance, or swing. So we see in our first image, this player has put a water bottle down on the fringe. If that player put that down there to aim at and then picks it up before they make their stroke, they still get the penalty. So you cannot set anything down in any of these ways. That second image, player put a club down, maybe it's an alignment rod to help you take your stance. That would be against the rules and you would get the penalty in this case as well. And the third one, this would also apply even if you're making a line with sand or dew to help with either your stance or your swing or something to aim at. That's just calling out that you can't get savvy and figure out, well, I'll just use the dew on the ground to do this. Then I won't get penalized. In this rule, you would still get the penalty under this rule. A caddy standing behind the player, again, something we talked about a lot in 2019 that is still in effect today. The rules have changed slightly to now define this restricted area where a caddy cannot stand when a player begins to take their stance for a stroke to be made. So the restricted area is close to or behind the extension of the line of play behind the ball where the player begins to take their stance for a stroke. So that's kind of when this rule clicks in. If you're about to take the stroke and you have 1 foot in position to make the stroke and you have your caddy standing behind you to help with alignment, you would be in breach of this rule. I will call out that when we're talking about caddies in this rule, it does also apply to partners. So if you're playing 4-ball or foursomes, they would not be able to be in this restricted area. Partners' caddies cannot be in this restricted area. And when talking about high school and college, if they have advice givers, which is generally a head coach of some sort or the team leader, they would also be giving their players penalties if they were standing in this restricted area. But if you do have a caddy standing behind you and you are in this situation, if you don't make your stroke and you see that they're back there, all you have to do is step away, tell that caddy or partner's caddy, advice giver to move, and then retake your stroke without that, or retake your stance without them standing there, and you would be fine. You've undid that, you're allowed to go ahead and make that stroke and you would not be penalized under this rule. It also calls out that if your caddy, partner's caddy, or advice giver is just standing back there because they're not paying attention, maybe they're raking a bunker that's behind you, maybe they're just looking at the sky. If they were standing back there not paying attention, they weren't, you would still not get the penalty under this rule. So the rules do recognize you can't always make sure that no one's standing behind you, and that kind of gives you an out. But it is the player's sole responsibility to get their feet in the right spot, get their club head in the right spot, and that's really what this rule is providing. No one else can help you with that. You need, as the player, you need to get in that spot yourself. And then accidentally hitting the ball more than once, we know it happens. What do we do? And this was a great change that, again, was made in 2019 that's still in effect today. If you do accidentally hit your ball multiple times with 1 stroke, you do just count that as 1 stroke, and there would be no additional penalty. So if you're on thick rough and you're chipping out, maybe your club gets stuck and you accidentally hit that ball twice, essentially, you're probably not going to put the ball where you wanted it to be, so that's kind of your penalty. So they're not going to give you any additional penalty strokes for that. Again, that stroke counts. It only counts once, regardless of how many times you've done this or hit the ball, and then no additional penalties would be given. And with that, are there any questions on any of those?
Yes, a couple questions about the topics just covered. With respect to the first one, caddies, and then standing behind the line. The first question came in, are you allowed to switch caddies during a round? And yes, you are permitted to switch caddies with the exception or caveat that it cannot be to temporarily switch in order to get new advice or different advice from the new caddy, such as if you have a caddy that's an expert on your swing, but also a person nearby that is an expert on your putting stroke. You can't temporarily switch caddies to the new caddy that might help you with your putting stroke and then switch back. That would be not permitted by the rule and contrary to the spirit of the caddy rule. The next question, can an opponent legally stand behind the line of a putting stroke? Yes, the standing behind the line just has to do with caddies or advice givers, someone that is part of the side. and would be permitted to do by an opponent. However, you're getting into the etiquette part of the game and distracting. We certainly don't want to do that at any time, so just keep that in mind as well. Another question just came in: can a partner stand on the other side of the line? Yes, that rule just applies to directly behind the line, or an extension of the line of play behind the player. And another one just came in: if you accidentally hit the ball twice, do you count it as one stroke or two strokes? Now, this was a change, and it does count as just one stroke as long as it was by accident and not on purpose. The old rule was that the stroke does count and you add a penalty stroke for hitting it more than once, but with the new rules in 2019, they took that penalty away. It just counts as one, because if it was by accident, in theory, that is not at all what we intended to do. If we do hit it more than once, and it's probably not going where we wanted it to, so the rules aren't going to penalize the player again by adding an additional stroke. And that is all the questions that we have had submitted so far. We can hang around just for a few minutes in case there are any additional questions that trickle in. But again, we thank you for being a part of this first session. It was a great intro. Amanda did a good job of explaining some of the basics of the rules of golf. These sessions will get a little more complicated or meaty as far as the rules go as we go on each week. So we do encourage to take a look at the rules 101 to get prepared for those. There's some great videos and great slides on the topics, and certainly would prep you for this session and asking questions. Also, if you want to do additional homework, Amanda mentioned this before, but reading those definitions are a key to understanding the rules of golf. And if you know the definitions, you'll know a lot of the words that are on these slides. You'll know a lot of the words that we use to answer the questions, and it'll also help you ask the questions in a little better manner, or a little clearer manner, in order for us to answer, so that way we know exactly what you're talking about. So thanks a lot for joining, and also if you want to hang around and submit a question, we'll be glad to stick around for a few minutes. But thanks, Amanda, and thanks to you all, and please spread the word to those that may also be interested in joining. Just because they weren't a part of week 1 doesn't mean they can't join for week 2, 3, or 4, and so on. And also, we welcome any feedback that you might have. But hope you all enjoy the rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you next week.